my follow-up question to this, Scott, is so when you
Yeah.
look at the journey of mastery, when
Hmm.
I read through this book, uh, one thing that comes back, and I think it comes with a lot of your work that you do, is uh, I tend to look at mastery when I know that I want to be the best in my profession.
Hmm.
Okay, but what profession I'm going to get in is something that I'm not sure when I'm in college or I'm in school.
Right.
Okay, and suddenly I'm in a job or
Yeah.
probably at work, and suddenly you're talking to me about mastery, right? And I'm not prepared. In my mental models are not there for building mastery. So
Hmm.
is there something that one needs to do? For example, I was thinking as I was reading your book that
Hmm.
in schools you start teaching subjects, right? But
Hmm.
when I saw what Edison did, or when
Yeah.
I saw the gaming example that you just gave,
Yeah.
one of the things that I see is uh, I have to be the best tennis player in the world. I have to be the best golfer in the world. So therefore, does mastery start with defining a profession first that you would get interested in, and then you start teaching the subjects, which leads to mastery?
Well, this is a really interesting question because um, I think what we're hitting on here is not just a question of like what's involved in becoming world class and what's involved in mastering a skill, but also thinking about you as an individual, you and your career. What is the sort of portfolio of skills that you bring to the table? And I think this is a deep question because a lot of the research, like again, if we go to Anders Ericsson is the person that I love to cite here because he did so much to our understanding of expertise and mastery. He was really focused on, I would call them fairly narrow professions. So like chess grandmasters and, tennis players and people who had kind of reach the pinnacle of a specialization of some narrow skill that was well defined. And the author David Epstein, he kind of wrote a book critiquing Anders Ericsson to just sort of talk about like, well, in a lot of workplaces, being really, really good at one thing is not actually what the game is, right? That it's about having this sort of portfolio of skills, this range, as he calls it. And I think that's a useful point. I think, I don't have the citation offhand, but I recall running into a paper which was arguing about double majors, so people who take two different majors in university, having like kind of the one major is sort of like the specialist animal. So it's like it's the giant panda that only eats bamboo, and having the double major is like being the omnivore. It's like you're being like the city rat who can eat every kind of garbage. And in an environment which is very stable and predictable, being the specialist pays off because you're only learning what's relevant to that job. You're going to create a lot of waste if you learn skills that you don't end up using. But if you have more breadth, you have more tolerance to variation and risk. So I think that is, as a young person who doesn't know their career or who is in an early stage of their career, I do think um, you need to have this kind of portfolio analysis because if you, let's say, okay, what is the highest paying profession? And like the classic example that often gets cited is like petroleum engineers. So petroleum engineers, I don't know when this was. This would have been like in the early 2000s or something. Were like, exorbitantly paid because there was a shortage of them. There was a real boom in like, gas and oil fracking. So if you were a petroleum engineer and you were just graduating with your like PhD at that time, they were paying you like millions of dollars to do your work, right? And you're a new student, you're like, I want to go in, like, I just want to make money. Maybe you're just a hypothetical, super materialistic student. I'm going to go into petroleum engineering. And then you get to the end of your career and then you find out, oh, actually gas prices, oil have fallen and they're laying people off. And now you have this like really well-developed hyper specialty that turns out is useless for like most other lines of work. And so you've made an investment that was like owning one stock. If it does well, you've made much more money, but the safer strategy is to own a portfolio of different stocks so you have diversification. So I tend to think of that problem in terms of, if you're really young, like if you're going into school, it's better to choose, again, there's nothing wrong with choosing based on prestige. I think a lot of people know this, especially in India. If you go to an IIT, you're probably going to get a job, even if it's not in tech later, because they know you're smart. That's the game everyone knows. Everyone knows you're playing. But in terms of just content knowledge of things that you're trying to do, I think having a bit more breadth, knowing a little bit more of some different things is probably valuable to a point. And when you start out in your work, it's helpful to look for workplaces that also introduce variability, that introduce different contexts, different industries. So my classic example of this is if you're going to go into accounting, for instance, you can go into a big accounting firm, which has lots of clients in lots of different industries, or you can go work for a firm and do their internal accounting. But if you work for the firm where you do their internal accounting, you get really familiar with one industry, one practices, one way of doing things. And it can be a little bit harder to switch fields. Not impossible, but a little harder. Whereas if you went to one of the big accounting firms, you can basically work anywhere you want after that. And there's a similar process in a lot of industries. So I think early on, having that intense, varied experience, even if it's not ideally what you want from a work-life balance, can be beneficial because it sets you up so that, well, you have this sort of foundation. So if you get into a new job and you need to spend the next couple years quickly getting yourself acclimatized, you're in a much better position.